I want to interrupt. Anybody that is not on the mailing list yet and wants to be, just pass this back and we'll sign up if you don't have your name there yet.
Awesome. So yeah, we're going to talk about animals tonight. One of my favorite subjects. I mean, most people like animals. You know, I've always loved animals. I've had dogs and cats, and right now, literally in my classroom, I don't have any dogs currently, but I got myself up to 5 dogs at one point in time, just so you know there. But right now, literally in my classroom, I've got a snake and a tortoise and then a turtle, the aquatic version, right? And a saltwater tank and a freshwater tank and all that kind of stuff. You gotta love animals. And students, kids always love animals too. Just today I was scheduling a field trip to take my 7th graders to the Woodland Park Zoo. Pretty much go there every year, and I love the zoo. I love animals, and I think, and most people do. Every once in a while, you'll run across someone who doesn't like animals, but that's very rare. You know, very rare that you find some. You may find some people that with phobia. You know, you find someone afraid of snakes or afraid of spiders or something. But most people love animals, and I think for good reason. I think when we look at them, we see that, you know, this is probably the area of creation where we see more design and artistry than pretty much anywhere else. I mean, there's just a magnificence within the animal world. There's an elegance and a beauty. There's a level of design engineering there that you don't find anywhere else. Most of your arguments for intelligent design come from within biology. You know, there's cosmological design, but there's a lot of arguments for intelligent design within biology, and we're going to look at some of the design features of animals. But one of the other things that I try to do, you know, as he mentioned, I teach at Cedar Park Christian Schools, literally pretty much all the way through. 7th grade life science, 9th grade biology, 10th grade chemistry, human anatomy and physiology at the senior level. Then I also teach like biotechnology in one semester and apologetics another semester. And I'm currently teaching at Northwest University a class called Integrated Science. But one of the things that I try to do in in the teaching that I do at that level is to emphasize what I think is one of the real benefits that science brings to us. And because, you know, a lot of science is atheistic based, and we got to be real careful. You know, we need to have a healthy skepticism of what science is teaching today, and particularly with regard to origins, because they're dedicated to naturalism. They're atheists trying to doing their best to explain how the world came about through pure natural processes. So we got to be skeptical of all that. But the technology, what science has also, though, brought to us is a recognition of just what a marvelous thing it is that God has made. I mean, I've said it many times. It's like God created the cosmos, created life on Earth here in such a way that we would never finish fully investigating it. You know, and we're able to see aspects of God's creation no one ever saw before. We're like the first generation of people to see some of the aspects of God's creation, like the cell, all of the molecular engineering that's there within the cell, or the vastness of the cosmos, the first that really understands how big the cosmos is. And within the animal realm as well. I mean, no one's ever been able to go down into the ocean and see some of the creatures that we now know of, or can magnify some of these microscopic animals, scanning electron microscopes and things that allow us to peer in and see levels of design. So science has brought something really great to us. And if you teach science from that perspective, you know, that what you're studying is God's creation and what a marvelous thing it is. Science can be pretty cool, you know, it really can. And so I really get a kick out of teaching science and revealing God's creation to young people in that way. Okay, but for within this, animals are very, very important, very, very important. Not only are they very beautiful, elegant, fascinating, but they're also the portion of the creation that we probably love the most. I mean, how much do we love our pets? They're no longer with me, but those are my dogs. I got myself into 5 dogs at one point. Moved here with 4. Now, do you know what kind of house you can rent when you have 4 dogs? You know, you got any idea what kind of house? The only person that'll rent you a house if you have 4 dogs is a person that has a house that can't get any worse. Let's just put it that way. 4 dogs trying to find me a rental when I first moved there. It must have been crazy. But we do love our pets. I mean, there's a extraordinary love that we have for the animal world, and I think we need to think about that. And especially, I want you to think about, as I move through this, why did God create the animals? Why did he create them? A lot went into making the animals. Why did he do it? We're finding new animals all the time. New animals are being discovered all the time. We have no clue at this point even how many animals there are. This one was just discovered in 2015, what they call a ninja lantern shark. Ninja shark, completely black, and it's got bioluminescent spots running down its head that's supposed to give it a faint blue glow and allow it to camouflage itself better in that lighting of the ocean or stuff. But finding new animals all the time. At this point, we really have no clue how many animals there are, literally. Because most of them live in these dense concentrations, you know, in these rainforests or on your coral reefs, dense concentrations. And we now realize just how microscopic, especially in the insect world, many are. The estimates on the number of animal species that might be on Earth today ranges from 3 to 30 million. That's the estimate of how many animals, and that's because the estimates on how many insects there are ranges from 1 to 30 million. There could be as few as 1 million. There could be as many as 30 million insects. We really have no clue, just because they're that small. And you know, within a 1 acre of rainforest, there can be like 10,000, you know, different species just within that one area. But there is something really special about the animals. I mean, it's sad too that we've managed to destroy so much habitat, clear them out of the areas that we live in. You know, we live in these concrete jungles now, void of all animals unless you go down to Woodland Park Zoo, and then you can really see them. Even me, I like to go out hiking, love to go out hiking, but I'll go out, do an entire hike, you know, 4 miles, 5 miles up, I'd come all the way back without seeing one single animal. You know, it's a bad. I remember it was a couple of summers ago. I went up and did a hike up to Mirror Lake, so out towards, is it Mirror Lake? Heather Lake? Was that down Grand Falls 22? Heather Lake, I think it was. Did a hike up to Heather Lake. One of my first hikes up to one of these lakes that are kind of up on the top of the world, you know, hard hike, getting all the way up to a lake way up on the top of the world. Get there, most beautiful sight I'd ever seen pretty much in my life. You know, lake just absolutely so still and reflective. That's like a mirror. Huge cliff in the background with waterfalls, you know, snow melt, waterfalls. Just beautiful, beautiful, spectacular scene. I'm sitting there eating my lunch, and a little chipmunk jumps up on the rock next to me. And the most beautiful scenery I'd ever seen in my life suddenly goes away because he's a little chipmunk. You know what I mean? I mean, that's how special animals are, really. There's just being able to watch it bounce around and stuff is so cool. And I think this appreciation that we have for animals, you know, it makes sense, especially when we consider that the animals are the only part of God's creation that he spent 2 days on. You know, think about the days of creation, what was made. Spent 1 day, day 4, creating all of the astronomical bodies. Sun, the moon, stars, it said were created on day 4. All of the astronomical bodies. That would be planets and stars, your galaxies, your everything out there. 1 day. And 1 day on the dry land and plants. Plants are pretty cool too. I love to do a program like this on plants one of these times. So I just haven't. Dry land and plants on day 3, right? Animals on both day 5 and day 6. Flying creatures and sea creatures on day 5. Land animals along with man on day 6. The only part of the creation that God spent 2 days on. A lot of time making animals. And again, we have to think about why. Why do you really make them? Most of them are not really necessary for an ecosystem. I mean, you need producers and consumers and decomposers. But in reality, the animals are a competitor for us as a consumer in many ways. You could debate just how necessary they are to have a functional ecosystem. A lot seems to have gone into them. Why did he make them? Just think about that for a little bit. But I want to kind of take you through just kind of we'll kind of overview some cool aspects of animal design. But I think one thing, you know, we tend to overlook is really just how is the intelligence of animals. I mean, especially when you consider that, you know, from our perspective, many animals don't even have brains. They have, a lot of the insects in particular just have what's called a ganglia. You have a few little nerve cells lumped together, but we got ganglia all over our body. You know, they don't really have what you want to call but even the ones that we consider, you know, less intelligent, you know, are incredibly. I had a mouse, you know, that was at my house for a while, and I was trying to catch this thing. It was amazing what this mouse was able to do. I caught this guy on photo one day, just amazing, crazy intelligent some of these animals are. This guy was something else? But just kidding. So, but just as an illustration of some intelligence, especially within your insects, we tend to think of the insects as being, the least intelligent animals there are, because like I said, they really have no brains to speak of. But you can look at some of these insect, especially the colonial or colony insects, as being just amazingly intelligent. I'll give you a couple examples here. The ants, for example. Ants, like many of your colony insects, are argued to behave as though they're part of a single mind, as they just seem to all be connected together somehow, telepathically or whatever. I think about the Borg. Do we have any old Star Trek fans? The Borg, the Borg. They were all connected together. I taught. Okay, so getting off, I'm going to do some rabbit trails. I can already tell now. I just finished teaching a Bible class, apologetics class at a Bible college down in Tacoma, Slavic Bible College down in Tacoma. And I ended up doing this exact same talk and mentioned the Borg. And this is probably about 50, 20-year-olds or so in the class. Not one single person in there knew who the Borg were. I was floored. Not one single person knew who the Borg were. I even came back the next class period. Okay, I got to know for sure. Not because none of you seem to react to that. Who knows who the? None of them. Anyway, that's a Star Trek thing. If you don't, I love sci-fi. Anyway, behave as though they're kind of part of a single mind. They all seem to know exactly what they're doing, what everyone else is doing. There doesn't seem to be any leaders. They all know what exactly they're supposed to do, what their task is, and what to do. They all seem to be connected. That's how they're described, as though they're part of a single mind. And they can do some amazing construction projects. In areas where ants live, where there's a lot of rainfall, in some of your rainforests and stuff, you can find leaf weaver ants. And this picture doesn't really do it justice what these things do. But the leaf weaver ants, because the ground tends to become saturated with water, they end up having to build nests up in the trees by weaving leaves together. And again, they seem to have no leaders, but they all know exactly what they're supposed to be doing and all working together in big teamwork kind of effort. Some of them hold the leaves together. You got some come in here and hold leaves together. And then others, what they do is they actually go down and get their little brothers and sisters that are still in larval stages and bring those up and use them as little glue guns. They secrete a silken strand, and so they just take their little brother and they say, okay, and they weave these leaves together, But they build some amazing, and we're talking, that picture didn't do it justice, massive, massive constructions. But again, they all seem to know exactly what to do at any one point in time. Who needs to hold it here, and who needs to hold it here, who needs to hold it here. There's some amazing construction that's going on there. We also find that there are ants that are involved in a level of what we would call horticulture. Okay, and a good example of this are what they call the leaf cutter ants, shown here. Leaf cutter ants, as the name implies, are they cut leaves and then they haul them back to their whatever you call their underground little den thing there. People had observed this for ever, but it was is assumed, as you rightly would, that they were hauling the leaves back to their den to do what with them? To eat them, right? You would figure that they were harvesting these leaves for food, but they found that once they got underground and looked at what they were doing, realized they weren't eating the leaves. What they're actually doing is they're using the leaves to create a mulch, a food, to grow their underground garden. And what they're actually growing is a fungus. They're actually growing a fungus garden underground. They feed it with these leaf paste that they make. They then come and prune it. They harvest from it. You see them harvesting some right there, and you see the pile. So they ball it up, create a little harvest from it, create these little balls and stack it up, so they can come back and eat it later. I mean, it's pretty cool stuff. We also realize that ants actually have, in a way, pets. If anybody's seen The Bug's Life, this is a little critter that was on The Bug's Life. It was actually the pet of the queen. His name was Afy. The queen, by the way, did the voiceover for that was Phyllis Diller, if you remember who Phyllis Diller was. She did a voiceover for the queen. Anyway, she's had this little dog-like critter with her, but she's an ant, obviously, and it wasn't a dog. But she called it Afy, and what it was an aphid. Ants actually keep aphids, and if you ever see ants up in a bush, and this might be the only kind of thing a biologist does when they see ants. They stop and check them out and see what they're doing. But I've seen this many times. If you ever see ants crawling up on a stem in a bush, stop and take a look. They're going to be really hard to see because they're green, and on green stems, they tend to blend in very well. But what those ants are probably doing is out there taking their aphids to pasture. They take them out to pasture to walk around. The aphids have a long mouth part called a proboscis that'll drill into the plant, suck out the phloem, the sugary solution from the plant, and then they will secrete that as a solution called honeydew that the ants eat. So they actually, but they take their herds of aphids out to pasture. But also interestingly, at the end of the year, when come fall, they will take them underground with them and care for them and keep them until the next year when they can take them out to pasture again. So they just don't abandon them later and stuff. It's very cool, involved in animal husbandry. But I think one of the biggest unknowns about the animal world, as I mentioned, the ants act like they're part of a single mind, but where's the communication? One of the big unknowns in the animal world is communication. But we know enough. We've seen enough behavior. It's really hard to observe animals, in their native state, especially aquatic animals. What can we do? Go down with a big sub and stuff. But it's really hard to observe them. But we really getting really skilled at creating blinds, and these photographers will hide out in these blinds for weeks, literally catch this one little 30-second clip. But that's one of the big unknowns is the communication. We know animals are communicating. We can recognize communicational gestures, vocalizations, posturing. We know they're communicating. We just really don't know how or what they're saying. And I think this is best illustrated by the only form of animal communication that we've been able to decipher. But I think that they're communicating along this line tells us how much animals are communicating in general. That if they're communicating this, and one of the best examples of animal-specific information that's being communicated by one animal to another, it's what's called the waggle dance of the honeybee. Well, honeybees were, I realized, to perform a weird little figure-8 dance. They had observed these things performing this little figure-8 dance, and initially it was assumed that this was a mating dance. Because there's a lot of animals that do mating dances, birds in particular. If you've never seen the birds of paradise doing their little mating dances and stuff, or your field hens, the males will get together in a clearing and literally do a dance-off. Two males will kind of do a dance-off competition. But it was assumed that this was probably a mating dance that males often do to show how healthy they are. They do these mating dances to show how healthy, and I'm the biggest, I'm the strongest, I'm the healthiest. Well, they were observed to this little figure-8 dance. You can see one of them doing a figure-8 right here. And see, it always comes back and does the figure-8 in the exact same spot every single time. Eventually, what they were communicating was deciphered. And what this is a scout bee that has found food, has come back to the hive, and is communicating to the hive the location of the food. The direction, when it does the waggle, that's telling the hive what direction that food is in relation to the sun. The length of the waggle gives them a measure of distance, and the intensity of the vibration is to some degree communicating the quality of the food. So they're actually communicating specific information to the hive. But again, these are insects with no real brain. They just have a little ganglia. But we've deciphered that they are communicating, and I think if we have to assume that all animals are communicating along this level, that they're communicating very, very specific information to one another. We just haven't really been able to translate it or decipher much of that communication. But it's still very, very cool. Okay. Now, one aspect of animal design or behavior that has probably interested us the most, especially as a technological people, is flight. Nothing has interested or caused us to marvel or caused us to study them more than flight. Especially since travel for us is a very laborious thing. I mean, people can walk on, at most 25 miles a day. That's historically how far people have been able to travel per day. Either on foot or on horseback, 25 miles a day was about as much as you could travel. But we would be able to see a hawk or an eagle cresting the mountain, while we were standing there watching it, knowing that it would take us weeks to get to where that thing just flew to in a matter of minutes, an hour. There's a graceful nature to it. There's a perfection there that we are only really just now beginning to fully appreciate. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities. Flight, more than anything else, has been a source of great curiosity to humans, especially once we reached a stage where we had become technologically capable of possibly trying to copy some of those designs. We started trying to do so. But much of the flight has been a mystery, and still today we're just now kind of figuring out some of it. In particular, it now has become clear that there are birds seem to be able to literally control almost every single feather. Their flight feathers in particular, through slow motion photography, it's become apparent that we know that all of those feathers are attached to muscles, and it's through slow motion photography we realize that they are controlling every single feather, you know, to precisely control flight the way they are. But insects as well have some really high level engineering flight capabilities. Insects in general, we know that insect flight is due to the fact that on the leading edge of an insect's wing, they create little mini vortexes, little mini tornadoes to give them lift. So on the leading, and they've determined this by using really slow motion photography and wind tunnels and these kind of things. They have little mini vortexes on the leading edge of their wings. But bees posed an additional problem for biological engineers who were trying to figure out how they fly. And actually, a famous entomologist back in the 1930s said that bees should not be able to fly. That it was an engineering, from an engineering standpoint, they should not have been able to fly. And that's because of their size and their wing beat. Honeybees, for example, wings beat on the level of like 230 beats per second. 230 beats per second. Now this is faster than most insects, but a lot of them have wings that beat on the order of way up there, like 190 beats per second. But 230, very, very fast, especially for their size. Their wings beat along the same rate as like a fruit fly, which is just a fraction of the size of a honeybee. So based on their size and their wing beat speed, it was said that they shouldn't be able to fly. And so they were intensely studied. It was actually studied in a lab, I think it was called the All-Weather Bee Flight Facility. There's a group that set out to study the bee's flight, and using, again, wind tunnels and slow motion photography, they said they solved the mystery of bee flight. They said they acknowledged that they're exploiting some of the most exotic flight mechanisms that are available to insects, but their explanation was that using slow motion photography, they realized that periodically the bee's wing inverted, which I guess to an engineer explains how bees are able to fly. I don't know. Didn't seem like much of a major engineering insight to me. But nonetheless, the marvels of technology that we would just love to be able to, do some of the kind of things, make the kind of things that they're able to do. And we've been studying flight, as far back as we've had the thought that we could make something like that. We've been studying these animals. Leonardo da Vinci himself did an extensive study called the Codex on the Flight of Birds, a book that was published following like a 15-year study of birds. This was actually from one of his manuscripts, this sketchbook right here from Leonardo da Vinci. He said a bird is an instrument operating through mechanical laws, which instrument it is in the capacity of man to be able to make with all of its motions. He argued that, we should be able to make that. This animal's following natural laws, and if we study that, we should be able to make something that can fly like that. And he set out to design what later became known as the orthoptera, or flying machine, Leonardo da Vinci's flying machine, shown here from one of his sketchbooks, where a person would lay down on this and then using their feet to move the wings. And another look at it, what the wings would have looked like from this sketch right here. They weren't able to, back then the materials were just too heavy, wood and canvas, way too heavy, and people just don't have the endurance to be able to keep something like that in motion. But recently, some engineers actually took Leonardo da Vinci's design and using modern materials and actually a motor, were able to get the thing to fly. So just from an engineering standpoint, it was solid engineering. They were able to get it to fly. But this tendency, the tendency to study God's designs and try to use those designs to make technologies or improve our own technologies has become big business. It's what is known as biomimicry. Or in the UK, they tend to use the phrase biomimetics, or you might remember the term bionic. They also call it bionic. Do you remember the $6 million man? That was bionics, or was a $6 million man. This is what's called biomimicry. Making technology that mimics biological technology is what we call biomimicry. And a number of important technologies have been developed using, by studying designs we find, and I don't even like using the word nature anymore, because remember that the scientific community today has adopted a position of naturalism. Okay, naturalism. They're doing their best to explain how the world came about through purely natural processes. They've adopted the world naturalism. They say you cannot even be a scientist unless you're invoking natural processes. So people like Sir Isaac Newton and Robert Boyle, Johannes Kepler, Galileo, would not even be scientists based on the standards of what scientists are asserting today. But natural processes and natural processes alone. That's why they're called that's why we call our museums natural history museums. That's why science it's called natural science. That's why we call that out there nature. That's not nature. That's the creation. I don't even like using the word nature anymore, because that's what that means. That's what they mean by that. But by studying some of God's creations, we've developed a lot of technology. For example, like they studied. You saw my dogs, okay? So I grew up in New Mexico, and so I know well how these burrs, these stickers, will stick to a dog's hair. If you've never taken a dog's, especially long-haired like those American Eskimos, taking those out, walking around with you out, some wild someplace, you come back. I've had stickers stuck all over them dogs and had to literally just cut them out, because they so well stuck. But these things really hang well, and they hang as a transportation mechanism. A lot of seeds have some form of transportation mechanism. You want to transport your seed away from your parent plant, and so it'll germinate elsewhere. But that's what they do. But upon analyzing these, realized they have these little hooks, and that ended up becoming the basis for Velcro. Person studied those, and that's where we get the Velcro from. But there's been a lot of these. They've studied termite mounds. They realized that termite mounds that are in areas where the temperatures, tend to average in the 120s and this kind of thing, in the temperature inside the termite mounds would be very cool and consistently cool. And they studied these and realized and looked at it and how the termites are modifying these structures and to keep the temperature this cool. And they realized that they were using through just convection and systematic opening and closing events, they were creating this constant internal cool temperature. And so they're literally building buildings now after studying termite mounds. They built one, the Eastgate Center in Zimbabwe, for example. I should have showed you a picture of that. Was built, literally, everyone knows is built after studies of the termite mound. Most of your professional swimmers today wear swimwear that was designed after studying shark skin. It's a shark skin-based swimwear. Or gecko's feet has been a major source of inspiration for adhesive surfaces. Geckos have, after studying gecko feet, they realized geckos are able not only just to walk up walls, but they can actually walk across ceilings. Just walk straight across the ceiling. And after studying their feet, looking at their feet under high power, we're talking scanning electron micrograph level photography, they realized that they have little pads of microscopic hairs on their feet that increase the electrostatic attraction enough so that they can just stick to substances. And so, we need to stick lots of things to lots of things, but glues themselves can be toxic, or the production of glues can produce toxic byproducts. And so instead of creating glues to adhere to things, you just create these little microscopic hairs if you're able to actually do so. That's a challenge, though. We study these things, and oftentimes we just do not have the technological capability ourselves yet to be able to make such things, or we try as we might. A couple other examples. They've studied humpback whale fins and are now developing turbine blades after studying the resistance capabilities of humpback whale fins and how that's what you think is just jagged randomness. Realize there's design behind it all. Morphing airplane wings. Like I said, when we look at birds' wings, they're not the rigid structures that we make with just a couple little, rudders on them or whatever they call it things, but they can, not only does the whole wing morphs, not only does the wing clearly maneuverable on a very, very fluid scale, but again, each and every feather along the wing can be individually controlled. It's an amazing thing. And of course, robotics has long looked at God's creations, not just insects, but mammals as well, for inspiration. And they're coming out with some amazing stuff. If you haven't looked around at some of the robotics they're coming out with now, they're coming out with some very, very agile, robotics at this point. Our school competes in a robotics competition every year, and it's amazing what some of these kids are able to do. Kind of jealous, a little bit jealous. Born a little too early. These kids got it made. They don't realize it. Of course, you never appreciate what you have, right? You never appreciate what you have, and they don't. And I say it too often. Back when I was in school, we didn't have that kind of stuff, but we didn't. Biomimicry. Now, I found a definition of biomimicry from the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory website. Lawrence Berkeley National Lab is one of these huge city-sized labs that we have in this country. We got these enormous cities we call labs in this country. One of them is Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And on their website, I found their talking glossary of genetics, a talking glossary of science terms or something. I can't remember what it's called. But yeah, I found a definition of biomimicry that I think is very telling. Listen to this guy's definition of biomimicry.
Biomimicry is the process of understanding the designs and materials we find in biology and adapting them for human use. So over the millions and millions of years of evolution, there's tremendous wisdom and efficiency in biological systems.
A couple of key terms he uses here. Designs. They realize they're designs. A design is something that's made by an intelligent mind. And there's tremendous wisdom and efficiency in biological systems. They realize that there's a wisdom there behind it all. But they refuse to acknowledge that there's a source for that wisdom. Some argue today that there are three fundamental components of everything. Matter and energy. We know now that matter and energy are inconvertible, but there's some that argue that there are three: matter, energy, and information. There seems to be a wisdom. And remember, how did God create the cosmos? What did he do? He spoke it into existence. You can argue that the Word of God actually can exist in three forms. There's the written Word, there's the living Word, his Son, and the spoken Word itself became the creation. He spoke the universe into existence. There's a wisdom there behind everything. But there are some that just won't recognize it. Or those that do recognize it, there's always been a little bit of a temptation there. And I'll point you to Paul on this to kind of emphasize the temptation that's always been there. Paul said in Romans 1:20, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse." Much of what God made, he made it in such a way that it would testify that it was created. That there would be there's unmistakable proof out there that a designer has made these. That is, there's design and wisdom. God made it in such a way, just like the guy at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory said, made it in such a way. But because of this, they realize that there's something very magical almost about it all. But because of this, there's always been a temptation for people that don't recognize the source from which this comes to worship the creation itself rather than the creator. Paul continues, Romans 1:20, 1:21. "For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. There has historically been a temptation to worship the creation itself because God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature are clearly seen in what has been made, but when they don't recognize the source from which that wisdom and design comes from, there's always been a temptation to worship the creation itself. And I think that a lot of your naturalists kind of fall into that. There's, I'll give you a couple more examples, but you hear how they talk about nature as if nature is so amazing and so capable of creating such great things. There's a wisdom and design that nature is capable of. They talk about nature in this grandiose terms. The phrase Mother Nature, Mother Nature, the all-creating Mother Nature. I mean, that's how they talk about it. It's a dangerous thing. I'm going to point you a couple of cool examples of design and how that design has been mimicked, how technologies have been designed based on this. We realize that some of your lobsters, what we call decapods, your lobsters and crabs all fit in this group called decapods, meaning 10-footed, but that they're able to see in waters that they shouldn't be able to see in. They can literally see in waters that are so black and murky, it was just bizarre. They can clearly see in these waters, but how in the world are they able to see in these waters? Well, this is one of the things that science has brought to us, is the ability to analyze these kind of things on a microscopic level. And what they did is they analyzed the lobster eye and found out that the lobster has a really, really unusual eye. Rather than having hexagonal facets, six-sided facets like most of your insects have, many of the crustaceans, especially in particular the decapods, have square facets. You can see the square facets there as well. And in addition, instead of having a refraction-based lens like we have, which bends the light down to a point on the retina, they have reflective. The design of the eye is called reflective superpositioning. Okay, what these are, these square facets basically form little reflective tubes that are oriented in a full 180-degree array, so that each one of these basically little square tubes has a reflective surface on the wall that is angled precisely so that all of these individual facets focus the light from all of these facets. We're talking thousands of facets, all focusing their light on the exact same point on the retina, intensifying the image, allowing them to see in the dark. Okay, it's a really, really unusual eye, and engineers have jumped on this and are themselves trying to design technologies based on that. UK researchers announced that they were developing an X-ray telescope to measure low-level X-rays that could be mounted on a free-floating satellite or possibly the International Space Station if they ever get involved with it. But and they would call it the Lobster All-Sky X-ray Monitor, designed based on the lobster eye. The Department of Homeland Security invested $1 million into developing this device called the Lobster Eye X-ray Inspection Device, or LEXID for short. This is like literally a prototype model of it. And you can see the square facets, of the lobster eye right there in this prototype design. What it does is it sends out low-level radiation that will then bounce off of objects. It'll be the radiation's then collected and intensified by the lobster eye, allowing them to see into cargo containers, for example. Thus, the Department of Homeland Security's interest in investing $1 million into this thing. But they also envision uses for it in everything from construction, searching for underground lines and wires before digging, or even archaeology, finding the next Tutankhamun, tomb out there in the Valley of the Kings, or that kind of thing. Could be in some important technology. We realize now that there are a lot of animals can see that we didn't think could see either. And I mentioned this one only in passing. I don't have a technology that's been based on this necessarily, but there's an interesting quote that follows. Researchers recently realized that even starfish can see, and particularly a kind of starfish called a brittle star. They don't have eyes, but they realized that they were seeing. And what they now know is that their entire skeleton appears to form one big compound eye. The leading researcher, a lady by the name of Joanna Alzenberg, states that the study has shown that how great materials can be formed by nature. far beyond current technologies. In general, arrays of micro lenses like these are something that technology tried a couple of years ago to make, but nobody knew something like that already existed in nature. But they talk about nature in grandiose terms. Oh, great materials can be formed by nature far beyond current technologies. We've also studied animals' abilities to navigate with great interest because we would like to make things that can navigate themselves. Right? We make all kinds of, especially now the drones have just absolutely taken over. We would love it if these drones, they can navigate themselves. But as things currently sit, we have to program them or be able to see them and operate them manually or program them with specific flight instructions. Okay? But a lot of animals can navigate. And a group sought out to try to figure out how specifically the bees could navigate. And this was at the Australian National University at what they call the all-weather bee flight facility. They sought out using, again, wind tunnels and but a wind tunnel where they could project video images on the wall to analyze how these bees were maneuvering around objects. And what they realized is that the bee also has an unusual compound eye. And it's this compound eye that was the key to its navigation. Navigation, the ability to change direction as needed when you're approaching objects. You can navigate around things, okay? So they realized that they called their detection system optic flow, okay? And what it basically is of course, they have a compound eye, as I mentioned. This is not actually a bee eye, but it was a very cool image of a compound eye. They have hexagonal facets, compound eye, and each eye basically sees a different image. So they're not all focused to intensify an image the way that the lobster eye is created to do. Instead, each facet sees a different image. And as an image moves past from one facet to another, it's able to very precisely gauge its speed. And therefore, it's able to very carefully gauge its distance. So it uses the speed at which an object moves past its field of view to gauge its distance. Meaning, and it seems very, very simple. So if something's moving past you moving very quick, you're probably really close to it. But if it's moving very slow, at this rate you're traveling, it's farther away. Okay? You know how fast you're traveling, and so if something's moving very quick, you're real close to it. And so anyway, this is a complex system called optic flow. And researchers have jumped on this too, trying to figure out ways of mimicking this. Because like I say, we have lots of stuff out there that we would love to be able to navigate itself, but at this point and technologies are rapidly advancing, but at this point we still don't have anything that can navigate itself. We have to pre-program them with or send them telemetry data. So you have to send them specific instructions. As it is right now, these aircrafts, if something pops up in there that wasn't expected, they just plow right into it. Or things, these rovers that we're sending off to Mars, for example, have to be sent instructions. But it takes like 11 minutes for the instructions to get from us to Mars, and then for the response to get back to us from Mars. As a result, these rovers can only travel like 50 meters in 30 days because you have to specifically tell it, okay, turn your wheels to the left just a little bit, now move forward, and then response comes back, okay, I've moved my wheels, and now move forward 10 feet, and moves forward 10 feet, sit back. So we would love to be able to create things that can navigate themselves. One other big mystery regarding animal movements along this way is their ability to migrate, which involves both navigation, the ability to navigate, and a compass of some sort. You need to be able to orient yourself. There are lots of animals migrate vast distances, and this has always been a big mystery. We're talking precise levels of migration. Birds that appear back on the exact same beach, in the exact same tree, year after year, although they migrate, literally some of them migrate like thousands of miles. So you need two things. You need to know you need to be able to navigate, which is just some way of being able to change direction, some kind of system for judging distance to things, like an optic flow type of compound eye. But you need also the ability you need to know where you are in relation to where you're going, which that kind of orientation means you need to be able to you need some kind of compass. You need something to tell where you are in relation to where you need to go, some kind of compass. And they've actually found that there are a lot of animals, that animals are using a lot of different techniques to gauge where they are. Some are actually reading stars. They've done planetarium experiments and realized that some are actually using stars to judge their location. Others are apparently using the moon, as well as others are using the sunlight, but the sun doesn't have to be visible. They're actually able to detect the direction that the light is coming from, called the polarization of light. Some are actually able to judge that as well. So there's a lot of different techniques they use. But migration, animals' abilities to migrate is phenomenal. This little animal right here, called the bristle-thighed curlew, migrates 5,000 miles every year from Alaska to tropical Pacific islands. This little bird right here, called the short-tailed shearwater, migrates 8,000 miles every year from Australia to Alaska. And I picked these. A lot of animals migrate at these distances, literally, but I picked these out in particular because these two migrate unguided. The parents leave before the chicks have fledged. The parents leave the chicks behind. And as soon as the chicks are able, and actually one of them intentionally gains a little weight and the other intentionally loses a little weight to get themselves to that precise weight that they need to be at. And as soon as they're fledged, as soon as they're able to fly, they launch themselves and travel the entire distance unguided, which is itself a bit of a mystery. Well, it's a significant mystery. And we've also found that many of these birds, especially those that reach up into the Arctic region, are flying using what am I wanting to say? Tracking devices. They put tags on them to track them. Using these tracking devices, they've learned that many of these animals are actually using what is called a great circle route, where instead of a direct route, which would require just following one compass heading, which is the easiest way to navigate, you just, okay, I need 16 degrees north, and I'm going to just stay there until I reach my destination. They use what's called a great circle route. Now understand, the globe is curved. Okay, the shortest distance between 2 points is only obtained by making constant course corrections. If this map were on a globe, this line would be straight, and this one would be curved. But this is a flat map. Okay, so this is actually the shortest distance, but instead of it being just one, and you have to make constant course corrections. So they realize that they're doing some sophisticated navigations. And of course, the wisdom for all of this is clearly defined in the Bible as the source of this. God himself speaking in the book of Job. Does the hawk take flight by your wisdom and spread its wings towards the south? What is interesting, though, about some of this, or at least I think this is probably the most interesting thing about some of these migratory routes, is that for many of these, I believe we must argue that these migratory paths are new. Remember that all of the animals that currently inhabit the globe were released after the flood in the mountains of Ararat region where the ark came to rest, and then they migrated around to their current locations. So these migratory routes are necessary for a couple of reasons. Either just seasonal fluctuations, they need to find feeding ground, kind of keep up with the feeding grounds, you know what I mean? Or they migrate to areas where there are a few predators to lay their eggs. And some of them do this. They migrate off to these terribly inhospitable areas to lay their chicks there, to lay their eggs there, give their chicks time to fledge, because there are no predators there. But they can't survive there. The reason why there are no predators there is because nothing can survive there, but they go off to these very inhospitable regions to have their eggs, and then they have to migrate all the way back. And others, it's seasonal. But these are new migratory routes that had to be learned at some point and now is being passed on as encoded information somehow. So what was originally a learned migratory route is somehow now being passed on as what we call innate information. And where that is, how that's done, we don't really know. But I think that has to be the argument that we make. And it's not just birds. Monarch butterflies do something similar. Monarch butterflies migrate as much as 3,000 miles. The monarch butterflies all over North America migrate down to Mexico. And as far up into Canada, migrate all the way down into Mexico. But Again, they do it unguided. Unguided. None of them that make this migration down to Mexico have ever made the trip before. None of them. They do it on an annual basis, but it actually takes several generations to do so. Because the lifespan of a typical monarch butterfly is very short. We're talking the order of weeks. And so they'll go through, through the summer period, they'll go through several generations. They lay eggs in milkweeds. Milkweed? Milk thistle? Milkweed? Yeah, milkweed, I think. They lay eggs in milkweed, and then the caterpillar is basically just an eating machine. The egg hatches, and the caterpillars just munch all day long to put on the weight that it needs to eventually form the chrysalis and then become the butterfly. And then it does it again. Lays the eggs again, the eggs hatch, munch, form chrysalis, and it goes through several generations during the summer, and then when it reaches that critical migratory generation, that generation is what they call the Methuselah generation, which lasts like 9 months. So it's like 3 to 4 week lifespan, I don't know the exact length, and then like 9 months, the Methuselah generation. That one goes all the way down to Mexico City, and then they mate. It's a big mating colony. They form in Mexico City, and then he comes all the way back, eggs, but it's a bizarre kind of thing.
The monarch's migration begins each September when most of the North American population east of the Rocky Mountains departs for central Mexico. Their journey can span more than 2,500 miles. Until late in the 20th century, the only people to ever observe the butterfly's arrival in Mexico were the farmers and miners who lived and worked in these volcanic mountains. Then, on January 2nd, 1975, in a forest 70 miles west of Mexico City, a spectacular discovery opened the door for the rest of the world.
Talking millions and millions of monarchs. Would that be a sight?
Millions of monarch butterflies hang in a forest of ornamental firs 10,000 feet above sea level. Frederick Urquhart, a Canadian biologist, devoted his career to the search for this colony, described it as a glorious, incredible place where butterflies swirl through the air like autumn leaves, shimmering against the mountain sky and drifting across our vision in a blizzard of orange and black. Science now glimpses the true magnitude of the eastern monarch's migration.
One of the really remarkable things about this migration is that all of these individuals have never made the trip before. It was their grandparents or great-grandparents 2, 3, 4 generations ago. They have no leader who's made the trip before, unlike whooping cranes or sandhill cranes. They don't have an older, experienced adult take the lead and show them where to go, where to stop and act. But in the end, it ends up on the very same trees, same area, same slope of the mountain as the parents and grandparents left from the previous year.
I don't know if they said it, but they didn't discover where they were going until like the 80s. They knew that they were migrating down there, but specifically where they ended up, they didn't know that until like the 1980s. It's amazing how recent some of these discoveries were. As I mentioned, there are several techniques we know that migratory animals are using to migrate. Star maps and moonlight and polarization of the sun, all these kind of things. And we've known that they've actually used, many are able to sense the magnetic field as well, that they're able to sense magnetic fields. And it's long been assumed that they were doing that. But one specific instrument that was used to do this was revealed by studies of homing pigeons, or what you might call carrier pigeons. Which have been used literally to carry mail or messages all the way back to the time of the ancient Egyptians. And they were used in both world wars to carry messages. In fact, there There were 250,000 pigeons used by UK forces in World War II. 32 were awarded the Medal of Valor. True story. 32 pigeons were awarded the Medal of Valor by UK forces in World War II. But studies recently revealed how they're able to, because they migrate to the very specific spots. They're able to be trained to come back really quickly, can be trained to come back to a new spot, to be able to carry these messages. Researchers, though, analyzed their beak and identified that within the beak of the homing pigeon, they have little mini compasses. Gerda Fleischner at the University of Frankfurt, in collaboration with what's called HashiLab, have identified that they have little magnetic particles called magnetite and magnemite in the structures of their neurons. So the nerve cell called a neuron has a long axon that'll come out of it to send a message, and then the incoming signals are on what is called dendrites. And these particles are in the dendrites of the neurons of the beaks of these homing pigeons. She summarizes. Iron-containing particles of magnemite and magnetite in the dendrites of sensory nerve cells are arranged in a three-dimensional pattern with different spatial orientation designed to analyze the three components of the magnetic field separately, thus acting as a three-axis magnetometer. Very interesting. And it's now assumed that similar particles may be possessed by all of these animals that we've realized could sense magnetic field. We know that sea turtles do it, bees do it, and even bacteria can sense magnetic fields. And it's now assumed that all of them probably have some kind of similar mechanism, some kind of little mini compass for doing this. Stephen Jay Gould, the most popular evolutionist of our day, even acknowledged the significance of it. He said, they're a striking good example of design. An organism that builds an exquisite machine within its body. The machine is a magnet. The organism is a lowly bacteria. And we would love to be able to make something like this. The problem is we still don't have the technological capability. They acknowledge in Springer. Research into how they work, these magnetic particles, has caught the interest of nanotechnologists concerning their potential application for everything from accurate drug targeting and even as a data storage device. The main problem lies in the synthetic production. Again, Gerda Fleischner and her colleagues says, even though birds have been producing these particles for millions of years, the main problem for scientists who want to find benefits for their uses will be the technological production of the particles. We still can't really do it, but God can supply these animals with amazing techniques. Jeremiah, even the stork in the sky knows her appointed season, and the dove and the swift and the thrush observe the time of their migration. But sadly, my people do not know the requirements of the Lord. They have built-in abilities. We have a built-in sense of right and wrong, but sometimes we just don't appropriately respond. Let me give you one more cool example, and that's color. One of the things we love the most, the beauty. There's an engineering, but there's also an artistry there in the animals. Engineering and artistry. And the color, the palette of colors that's available that's present in animals is just one of the things that draws you to them the most. But they have many different ways of producing colors. Many different ways of producing colors. Butterflies, very, very colorful, but even within butterflies, you find different techniques for producing colors. This is actually the same butterfly, and it has pigments, so pigments like melanin, that produces all the various shades of browns and blacks that we see, amongst the animal kingdom. This is melanin, the false eyes that you tend to see. But the top of this is the blue morpho butterfly. Morpho is the genus name, but the blue morpho butterfly shown here actually has it produces that blue color not using pigment, but using iridescence. Iridescence is a property of a material that causes it to reflect back a color, and a different color depending on the angle at which you look at it. But the blue morpho butterfly's wings produce this uniform, brilliant blue. And it's been described as being such a bright, brilliant blue that even pilots have reported seeing blue coming from the canopies on the rainforest as much as a half a mile above the forest. So very, very bright, brilliant blue that these things are emitting, but again, not using a pigment, but through iridescence, which is a reflective quality. The light is being reflected back. And they do this because they have uniquely designed scales. Now, all of your butterflies and moths have scaled wings. That's actually what their name means. Most of the insect order names end with orthoptera. So Hymenoptera, Coleoptera, Lepidoptera. The optera means wing. And Lepidoptera means scaled wings. All your butterflies and moths are in the order Lepidoptera, which means scaled wings. They all have scales. And these are just standard butterfly scales right here, shown in a scanning electron micrograph, one of your serious high-power electron microscopes at 50 power, scanning a little further, 200 power, a little further, 1,000, just to give you the detail on these butterfly scales, the architecture, the engineering that's behind some of these butterfly scales here at 5,000 power using a scanning electron microscope. But this is a standard butterfly scale, okay? But what is different about the blue morpho is what you see here. They have these long struts, or whatever you want to call it here. It's an engineer might have a phrase for this stuff. Sorry, I'm about life scientists. I don't know engineering terms. These beams or something, and then these cross braces or whatever you're going to call them. Anyway, they have these cross things right here. Scientists use a word whenever instead of thingy, and it's a factor. They have these factors right here. Anyway, that's a popular. Anyway, they got these things right here that brace. But in a blue morpho, they don't have those. When they looked at the blue morpho butterfly wheel on a cross section, what they saw was this. So instead of these being connected, this is just a slice through the butterfly blue morpho scale. Instead of those beams being connected by those cross bridges that you saw there, what they saw instead was what looks like a Christmas tree structure on this cross section. And they realized that the branches, if you will, on this Christmas tree structure are actually reflective surfaces. But a reflective surface at a very, very precise angle. So the light is reflected back, and by adjusting the angle that the light is reflected back, you alter the wavelength of it and produce a specific color. But it has to be very, very precisely engineered, very precise angle, because if you have two different wavelengths coming out, they can actually cancel each other out. But if the wavelengths match perfectly, which is what they do, then you can amplify that color, which is why it's such a brilliant, brilliant blue that comes out of these things. And biomimicry, your engineers that are employing biomimicry have jumped on this too. And there's a number of companies that are now producing substances that use this iridescence, that use the reflective surfaces that were studied from the blue morpho butterfly to produce colors for everything from textiles. This company, Morphotex, producing a number of textile materials. We see the blue morpho butterfly right there on their pamphlet. Everyone recognizes the source from which this engineering comes from. Produce all kinds of things from fibers to tiles and all kinds of things using, instead of pigments, which pigmented paint can be toxic themselves, or the production of them, toxic byproducts again, and also display devices. One company called Qualcomm is producing a display device called Mirasol that, instead of using projected light, uses reflected light and iridescence. By carefully controlling the angle at which the light is reflected back, you can get each cell of this Mirasol device you can form into an RGB palette. By just controlling the depth here, you can control the angle back. I found a promotional video from Qualcomm about the Mirasol device that, again, just talks. I want you to just hear the language that they use as they talk about biomimicry and nature, the ability of nature.
If I knew back then all that it would take to actually get to this point, I think we would have been a lot more scared. It was very risky. I think technically it's a very risky thing to do because there aren't very many display technologies that actually make it. I mean, there are hundreds that have come and gone, and there's only a handful that actually make it into the mainstream.
We use mirrors to bounce the light back.
Again, the language when they use when talking about nature, you know, they realize there's a design there. And boy, if we can just mimic that, we got some really great technology and how energy efficient nature is. I think there's a little bit of a danger there. Like I said, God created the world in an amazing way. It really is kind of almost magical. The way God made this, that's his invisible qualities. His eternal power and divine nature has given it this just bizarrely perfect, you know, aspect to it. Let me give you one more cool example before I close down here. And that's animals that have the ability to change color. Animals have the ability to change color, but not just color. Some animals like this cuttlefish, this is actually the same cuttlefish in both images. So not only can it change its color, but it can change the texture of its skin as well to try to camouflage itself. And I mean, literally, they can transform themselves. And this is for all the cephalopods, your cuttlefish, your octopus as well. Very, very skilled at. That's an octopus right there. You can see its eye and its little blowhole. But they have the ability to literally transform themselves into a coral reef or into a piece of seaweed, you know, just in an instant. It's just incredible, the ability of these things to again, mimic the surroundings that are around them. And this is what's called active camouflage. There's a lot of animals that have camouflage, but this is an active camouflage, ability to camouflage yourself to the specific surroundings around them. And again, we would love to be able to create things like this, active camouflage, especially for military. But at this point, it exists only in what we call proof of concept or prototypes. But they have looked into it and spent some money on it. For example, this cloaking device, that's about the closest they've come to creating an active camouflaging device. But all they're really doing on this is we're using a video camera to record what's in the background and project it onto the cloak. So by a far cry from what God has made, I tell you what. But the cuttlefish itself is probably the most skilled at this. Cuttlefish, just absolutely skilled. Little mini squid looking thing. And they have actually multiple techniques for changing color. Multiple techniques. So what you're actually seeing here in this video are color changing cells called chromatophores. And a lot of animals have these, even fish. These are actually color changing. The video is actually from fish scales. Okay, so even fish can change their color on this level. Chromatophores are cells that have little, either they're individual cells or groups of cells that have little muscles that can spread out pigments or concentrate the pigments in one area. You spread out the pigments and you become that color. You bring all the pigments in and bunch them together and they go invisible essentially. But they have color changing cells called chromatophores. They also have what are called iridophores. These are just tiny sacs of plates that will diffract light, producing the iridescent color like we saw in the blue morpho or the peacock's tail. They have that ability too. They have also what's called leucophores, plates that reflect surrounding light to help them camouflage. So by reflecting back the surrounding light, they kind of blend into the existing light. And they also have photophores. These are the bioluminescent producing cells, like the lantern shark that I showed you in the beginning that could produce color. A lot of the animals down in the deep dark produce light. They produce colored light. And you can see some of these little jellyfish-looking things that just look like spaceships. I mean, blinking and flashing strobe lights all over the place. Just look completely bizarre. But the cuttlefish itself is just amazingly skilled at this. So I want to show you something kind of cool. I got this off a documentary called Cuttlefish Kings of Camouflage. Because they have the ability to camouflage themselves, and I thought this is pretty cool. So so this guy's like trying to catch this crab, and so it changes the texture of its skin as well as its color, trying to blend into the coral reef. Look how it even throws up its tentacles, so trying to make itself look like a little bit of a weed there, you know, a little coral debris and stuff. But the crab's not fooled at all. He's like, dude, I know what you are. So if it can't camouflage itself, he has another trick that he can kind of pull out of his sleeve to try to catch his crab. We'll just watch what it does here. Puts on a little light show. It tries to mesmerize its prey. Look at that. That's actually light. That's coming from that cuttlefish. It's a mesmerizing technique. He tries to mesmerize it, and then when he goes, what is that? UFO. Comes in and grabs it. Got a couple of these unique little tentacles that he comes in and grabs it with. I thought that was so cool. You know, I don't have a biomimicry example on that, but What God created is really amazing. It really is. And if you come at science from this perspective, that what you're really highlighting is the marvels of God's creation, there's some marvelous things out there, and it can be really, really cool. And again, remember, God spent 2 days making the animals. So I just want to mention this as I close down. Why? Why did he make all these things? Why? Spent 2 days making animals. All of the amazing engineering and design features that he put in all these. Why did he do it? Why spend so much time making animals? Clearly, the creation was created, all of this was created just for us. The cosmos itself, everything here was created just for us. It went through an enormous trouble to create a world for us that was habitable for us. But why go to all the trouble making these animals? I mean, they weren't created to be food. That's clearly stated in Genesis, beginning of Genesis. I give you every green plant on the face of the earth and with fruit in it, seed in it. They will be yours for food and to all the beasts of the earth and the birds of the air and the creatures that move on the ground. Everything that has the breath of life, I give every green plant for food. Plants are created to be the food for us and all the animals. Didn't create them, we use them for commodities. You know, historically we've used leather for clothing and all that, but that wasn't part of the original design either. God himself, well, it says he made clothes of skin from an animal and gave them to Adam and Eve after their sin, but they weren't created to be commodities for us either in the beginning in this way. I think much of it was just done just to be a testimony to his creation. From Job, ask the beast and let them teach you, and the birds of the heaven and let them tell you, or speak to the earth and let it teach you. Let the fish of the sea declare to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In whose hand is the breath of every living thing and the breath of all mankind? Clearly, remember God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, clearly seen in what has been made. Did much of that. That magical nature of it all was created just to be a testimony that he had created all these things. But I think there's another reason that he made the animals as well. And I think that is because he loves us so much that he wanted to make a world for us that we would love, right? When you love someone, you want to give them things that they will love. And I think a lot of the reason why he did it was because he just wanted to create a world for us that we would enjoy and we would love, and create animals that we would make pets of and love on them. You know, so just remember that. When you're at home loving on your dog or your cat or what have you, you know, thank God. Because he made that animal for you. Because he loves you so much. Let me close out in prayer. Father, how humbling it is when we consider what it is that you've made for us, Father. All the designs and all the animals that you made, everything that you've made just for us. Father, this wonderful place that you've made. Father, how humbling it is to know that the God that could speak the cosmos into existence, by the power, put everything out there by the power of his word, that you went to such trouble and such thought and such engineering and such artistry went into creating a world for us that we would enjoy so much, Father. We just thank you and we praise you for being the glorious God of all creation, but for being a loving Father, a Father that prepared and formed this place for us, because, Father, we do love it here, and we thank you for this, and we glorify and honor you as the God of all and the creator of everything, and for loving us so much. Father, we thank you, we praise you. Father, we consider this your Son that you sent to die for us, Father. We humble ourselves before you as sinners, knowing that we have disappointed and that we have sinned against you, done things that we know are wrong, Father. And when we consider what you've made for us and the great sacrifice that your Son excommunicated, Father, Such great love is inconceivable. How can it be, my King, that you would die for me? Father, we praise you. We thank you. Thank you, Lord Father. We praise you. We love you. In Christ's name, amen.
Thank you, Chris. Let's give Chris a hand for that presentation. We have to realize that there are, how many? 3 million species in this world of animals, and you covered how many? There's a lot more to cover. But anyway, we thank you for his presentation. And we'll take a few questions. And while you're thinking of your question, I'm going to ask the two men to come forward. If you wish to contribute to the support of this ministry, feel free to do that either through the plates or the donation box in the back, whatever you're comfortable with. So questions that you might have, remember that all of these lectures, including Chris's, are recorded and they'll be on the website. We've had live streaming support here, and so that will be available probably in a few days or so. So questions, I'll bring the microphone around, and then you can ask your question of Chris so that it gets properly recorded as well.
Two questions or comments. Number one, do animals think? And number two, we have a cat that I'm sure talks to my wife when it's time to have a snack. I mean, she literally does. It almost sounds like a language. So, I mean, comment on those two things.
Wow, of course they think. I mean, do they have profound thoughts about the existence of the cat kingdom and where they're going to be in a few? How deep are their thoughts? Don't know. But they, much more intelligent than I think we realize. The mammals clearly. The mammals all. I mean, I've always, like I say, I've had lots of dogs and cats and stuff. I've not had a lot of time spent around horses, but people that have, I know, incredibly intelligent. I think about how much you love your dog. You know what I mean? Consider how much more that horse would mean to you. That was with you every day, all day. I gotta just think that people back in those days that were on horseback every day, how close those animals got to them, how much they relied upon them, and like I said, my dogs are no longer with me, but boy, as much as it hurt to lose those dogs, I can imagine how much it would hurt you to lose a horse back in those days too. Incredible how much we love our animals.
Any other questions out there that Chris might answer on your pet or any other animal?
Well, you said it would talk to you, a language of sorts, huh? A little bit? Yeah, there would make utterances, kind of sounds to talk. Yeah? Yeah? Yes, sir.
Okay. Are there any animals that create or use hot air to fly?
That use, I mean, they definitely use the thermals. They definitely use the air that rises due to what's called, convection thermals. They definitely ride the thermals. So on that level, yes. Do they have any more sophisticated mechanisms of catching warm air and using that? But they definitely ride thermals. They definitely go to those areas where hot air is rising and use that to get themselves aloft. So yeah, for sure, they do that. Yeah. We also know they migrate using the jet stream. So they're clearly more aware of the world than we have been for at least some period of time.
More questions? Well, if not, Chris will be around for a while yet. And so again, Chris, thank you very much for your presentation. So as we leave here, just want to remind you, on the back table there are those posters for the course, the Advanced Creation Apologetics course that Mike Riddle will teach here on Saturday, March the 19th. All the details are on that poster and the back of that poster. If you didn't get one and you want to take one to your church, and ask for permission to post it so we can get the word out on the availability of that course. And also Mike is speaking on the 18th on the battle for the next generation. He wants to speak about how do we reach our youth with a message of the gospel and creation. And so he's going to do that on Friday night, the 18th. He's also speaking in a different church on the 17th and also on the 20th. And all the details for that are on the apologeticsforum.org website. A flyer for Mike's talk on the 18th is also on the back table. And if you want to fill out a survey form saying, I'd like to see a speaker on this topic, and here's a speaker I'd like to listen to, put it on the form, and we'll put that on the list for consideration. I remind you as well, speakers like Mike who come in from, from a day's travel, when we bring him out here, we like to look for opportunities where he could speak at other churches or any other venue you might have an interest for him to speak at. So keep that in mind. So again, thank you for your support and of apologetics and your interest in apologetics. We have a lot of interesting speakers coming up over the next few months. The speakers coming up are all published on the web, so you can see who's coming which month and which date. And if you have an interest in having one of those speakers speak at your venue, just let me know, and we'll see what we can do. So let me close up in a word of prayer, and then you'll be dismissed to look at the resource tables and avail yourself of some of the refreshments. Father, we come to you again this evening just to thank you for Chris's ministry and for the word he's gotten out to us from you. Lord, we thank you for the beauty of your creation. We thank you for all the animals and birds and living plants and everything that you created, Lord, for us to enjoy. And we just thank you for that. And as we go out, give us traveling mercies as we go back home, and give us a wherewithal to share with our friends and colleagues and family what we've learned here. And we just pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.